Now, without further delay, let me go ahead and turn today's event, Automotive ERP, over to your first presenters, Sasha Banks, Senior Director, Industry Marketing, Oracle, and Paul Bresnahan, Vice President, Manufacturing, Fujitsu. Sasha and Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this morning. And welcome to today's webcast featuring Automotive ERP, discussing the turmoil, transformation, and recovery in the automotive industry. This webcast was produced in collaboration with Fujitsu, a leading provider of rapid ERP integration and lean deployment models, and Oracle, the provider of the world's most complete, open, and integrated enterprise applications, technology, and middleware for the automotive industry. My name, again, is Sasha Banks, and I am the Senior Director of Industry Marketing at Oracle Corporation.
And I'm Paul Bresnahan, the Vice President of Manufacturing at Fujitsu. Today we're delighted to feature two exceptional presentations focused on how the unprecedented turmoil in the global economy has transformed automotive ERP, and how best-in-class suppliers have restructured their supply chains by leveraging Fujitsu's accelerated ERP deployment of Oracle's transformation enterprise applications. Our first guest is Dave Andrea, Vice President of Economics and Analysis at the Original Equipment Supplier Association, also known as the OESA. They will be illustrating the catastrophic effects of production declines, sales slumps, and excessive capacity on the global supply base, and provide some insight into how suppliers are responding to government stimulus, market consolidation, and restructuring practices, with a view on how they will operate in the future. After Dave has presented, we will feature Craig Brown, CIO of L&L Products, a Michigan-based mid-sized supplier of engineered sealing products, who will discuss launching the Fujitsu-led ERP implementation of Oracle E-Business Suite. You know, Sasha, this has been an unprecedented year for the automotive industry. Vehicle production here in the U.S. is down over 20% from the previous year, with the U.S. market being one of the hardest hit. At the same time, excess capacity, rising fuel, and material costs have forced plant closures and job losses, with production today running at less than 76% capacity.
That's absolutely right, Paul. Yet despite all of this turmoil, automakers have begun to show signs of resiliency as they embrace their restructuring efforts. In fact, several automakers have transformed their operational performance from near devastating losses in the third quarter of 2008 to robust margins in the same period this year. In fact, Ford posted a $3 billion loss in the third quarter of 2008, yet turned it around in the third quarter of this year, posting a $997 million profit. Similarly, Toyota posted a $1.2 billion loss in the third quarter of 2008, yet earlier this year posted a $270 million profit. On the supplier side, companies such as Lear went into bankruptcy with a $98 million loss, yet emerged in the third quarter of 2009 with a $76 million profit. With these performance swings, it certainly seems that while necessity is certainly the mother of invention, an economic crisis is the mother of reinvention. I've read recently that when GDP has been at its lowest, disruptive innovations have emerged. And these innovations are not exclusive to advancements in vehicle and equipment technology, but also include innovations in business process and IT enablement. With that, I am honored to introduce our first speaker, Dave Andrea, Vice President of Economics and Analysis at the Original Equipment Supplier Association, also known as OESA. Dave will be sharing his observations and analyses to illustrate just how the catastrophic effects of production declines, sales slumps, and excessive capacity has impacted the global supply base, and provide deep insight into how suppliers are responding to government stimulus, market consolidation, and restructuring practices. Dave, thanks so much for being here today.
Very good. Thank you, Sasha, and it's a pleasure and honor for OESA to participate here in Detroit, Michigan with Fujitsu America, Oracle, and L&L Products on this webinar. OESA represents over 400 suppliers into the North American auto industry, and I would go along with the comments that both yourself and Paul made in terms of how resilient the auto industry is. here. Let me just sort of at the beginning here to set the stage for looking at Craig's presentation specifically with L&L, is to set the stage of what we have gone through in this year in terms of GM and Chrysler being in and out of bankruptcy with new boards, top management, and geographic footprints. Toyota and Honda promoting new leadership in their organizations. The U.S. government investing over $116 billion into the U.S. industry. We've also had 14 new supplier bankruptcies occurring in the top 150 North American suppliers, and I say new because some of them we had additional ones that were reoccurring. And we also had 35 additional major supplier bankruptcies outside of that top 150. And we didn't lose production through the year, but I would say that was not without an awful lot of hard work by all the OEM procurement and financial managers, as well as down through the entire supply chain. And the year isn't over yet. And you might say, well, Dave, it's only 2 weeks or so left in the year, but just look at in the last couple of weeks in terms of the major management changes that we've had in the industry here. But I think as you go through each of these things that happened in 2009, we're not on the other side of this. Risk is still very inherent throughout the entire supply chain. And so when you look at it from an ERP system and what I think the supplier enterprises of the future need to be, it looks towards scenario planning, because there really isn't any one single forecast that you can put in place that will be accurate when you have to deal with these types of issues. So I think what we see from OESA's standpoint in terms of the supply base is becoming bifurcated, if you will. The strong are getting stronger. And as we've done surveys through our members and through our council meetings, these are some of the elements that we see the suppliers being put in place that are outperforming the others. They're minimizing overhead structures. They're in a consolidation standpoint where they're trying to be the top 3 or 4 competitors within each of their sectors. They're establishing global marketing and purchasing footprints, but they have regional manufacturing and engineering depth. They're deleveraging their balance sheets, and they're trying to access capital from diverse parties. They're opening up their organizations to interface with more external resources from JVs and partnerships and other consortia. And I would say on the last point is that they're trying to create a closed loop process, if you will, to capture all the costs and the sourcing options across their enterprise to really see and determine what their program profitability is and what type of options and strategies should they put in place to optimize their product and their customer portfolios. Again, here I go back to that issue of scenario planning and risk adjustments in the supplier's strategies going forward, and how important that enterprise-wide real-time optimization that you need in terms of your decision-making processes here. Now, this is one chart that we've been showing to the financial community to show them that there will be an auto industry on the other side of 2009 here, whether you believe it or not. We pulled these North American sales and North American production numbers from CSM Worldwide, one of OESA's affiliate members, and you can see that the recovery does start to occur through 2010, but at least from this one forecaster, volumes will be up over the next 5 years or so, but not recovering to where they were in the top half of this, or in the front half of this decade here. But the other points that I put in here are in OESA survey data, that when we ask our members, what North American volume do you need to break even in your business? Traditionally it's always been kind of an 80% capacity utilization number going back a few years, but at the beginning of this year they told us it was 10.5 million units. Just in September they took out an additional 1 million units in their fixed costs, and it's down to 9.5 million units. So if we've restructured the cost that much Even if we do get the 10.5 million units, and that's where most of the forecasters are playing for 2010 here, we will have a profitable industry. But getting there is going to be very, very difficult for all the suppliers to face. Short term here, we have working capital and liquidity issues, production schedule volatility and the credibility that you might have in the production schedules you get from your customers, staffing material and other availability as we pull back from the dramatic cuts that took place at the front half of this year. And looking at the supply chain financial viability, even though the first tier is getting capital and we see some thawing there, our real concern for 2010 is with the smaller suppliers. And then even finally the success of GM and Chrysler and the other major customers. So that's in the short term. Now in the long term, and I come at it from a business economist point of view, I do think that we're still going to have downward pressure on prices. Even though the supply base here is consolidating, we do have to look at the industry from a global perspective. And there still will remain global excess capacity, and that's going to push prices downward. We have quantities that are uncertain in terms of the volatility of how these markets come back. And then as well, even again, while we talk about consolidation in the industry, there's great fragmentation and increased competition that's coming into play here that's actually making the volatility of production schedules and forecasting that much more difficult. So if you take price times quantity equals revenues, we're going to have downward pressure on that top line. Now, without a doubt, cost pressures are upwards when we look at material costs, healthcare costs, and the rest. So that's where I really get to where the suppliers can really succeed is improving their margins, and that's through increased productivity. Now, typically when we talk about productivity, you think about headcount, both on the hourly and the salaried side. And that certainly is a key component to productivity. But in a multi-factor viewpoint, you also have to look at productivity of your supply chain, how well you're optimizing your supply chains throughout the world. Are you working with your suppliers in the least cost manner in terms of product development, productivity, and the other elements there? And we can get into this in the Q&A session as well. And then finally, I'll get into capital productivity as well. And that really comes into asset utilization. As we talk to our members who have closed plants through this year and have gone from 4 plants down to 2 plants and even operating on just a shift and a half type of operation, they're amazed that they're getting more out of less. The one thing that we do know, though, is one certainty going forward is globalization, and that again puts a tremendous pressure on business planning across your global enterprises. Here again, I just pulled a chart from our affiliate member CSM Worldwide to show North American, European, and Japan and Korea and China production. And you can see how it is balanced across the world, and for major suppliers will need a footprint, a base of operation in each of those regions, although I think truly we will see strong regional supply chains going forward. Now, on my next slide here, these are all the issues that you all try to put in place day in and day out to try to maximize your profitability in terms of how do you make those make-buy decisions and your outsourcing decisions. And as we always say, it's not about least cost on that global basis, but it's about best cost. And typically, I think many of the suppliers have optimized these costs and tried to minimize these risks on a program-by-program basis. But here, I think going forward, and this comes back to the closed-loop thought process or mentality, and actually some of the work that we did going back about a year and a half now with CSM Worldwide, looking at how do you optimize all of these risk factors and costs at the enterprise level in a real-time basis. And that, I think, will the suppliers who succeed here will optimize their product and their customer portfolios by looking across each of these areas. And then finally, and I pulled this slide from Citigroup, from their research group here, in terms of some of the things that, at least from the analysts and the bankers' point of view, that they're looking at suppliers in terms of who do they want to do business with in the future. And these are types of operating metrics that the suppliers have managed their businesses to for years, in terms of differentiated product, organic revenue growth, return on invested capital, free cash flows, product technologies, proprietary product technologies, and customer diversification. But I think that the important thing to leave you with here in terms of my handoff then is to really look at how well are the suppliers doing to optimize each of those critical performance factors at the enterprise level. Again, you can improve your short-term return on capital, but you starve your product development processes. You have to move those forward in unison. That takes, I think, more scenario planning, because we will have greater and greater risk and volatility going into the future. And again, I think to the suppliers, the best enterprises of the future will be those suppliers who optimize across all of these fronts simultaneously. So with that, I thank you for your attention. Look forward to your questions. And this is my contact information if you have any other questions outside of the webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, and thanks so much for your insightful and thought-provoking commentary. You know, as we work in the industry as Fujitsu, we continue to see the points you raised around continued pressure on price, cost, and production, resulting in more and more focus on productivity, especially in the supply chain. And the other thing as well is, as you pointed out, other markets begin to grow as we emerge. You know, the need for global planning and the ability to make decisions is becoming stronger and stronger amongst our clients as well. You know, if companies want to weather this storm and emerge competitive as the market recovers, taking action now in these areas, I think, is critical. You know, this leads us nicely into our next speaker, who certainly has been busy taking action. Craig Brand, the CIO of L&L Products, one of the most innovative companies that has truly embraced the challenges of this industry and repositioned itself into one of the most successful mid-sized suppliers in the world. Craig, it's good to talk with you, and thanks for taking time to share with us your experiences.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Just a little background of L&L Products. We're a U.S. privately held company. We were founded 51 years ago. We actually have our main offices here in Michigan. We have over 700 employees worldwide. Our key locations are Brazil, China, France, Japan, Korea, Turkey, and of course here in Michigan. Really, we're kind of a unique design company, because we're really a specialty chemical formulator, and we take that what we call our chemistry and put the designs against our models, and I'll show you that in another slide. Mostly for automotive, but we've dabbled in aerospace and defense as well. In today's point, we do have a big R&D budget. That's what's very important for us, to have that innovation going forward. We couldn't lose that. And 10% of our company is dedicated to that R&D effort and new product launches. We need to reinvent ourselves every year. And we are considered the market leader in this technology and innovation, and it's something we hold and continue to drive for every day to make sure we don't lose that market share. And again, just to give you a perspective around the world, the OEMs are using over 5,000 of our specially designed parts, and here are some of our key customers as well. And as Dave spoke of customer diversification, we've had a lot of that going on in the last year, as you can imagine, some of it by design, some of it we didn't have any choice. So kind of what we do on our what would be considered a typical content or package that we would have on a vehicle. This one is actually on the Aurora that we had a few years ago. In this, we focus on safety, also lightweight. So our biggest competitor on a vehicle like this is steel. And then, of course, we want to make that car lighter and stronger and quieter. So you see we have what would be considered, in some cases, maybe 16 to 18 different unique designs for every vehicle that we produce. Some of the industry drivers that we went through, not unlike all others in this space, but really the economic meltdown that we had with GM and Chrysler impacted us greatly. GM was 15% of our business. Chrysler, between the U.S. and Europe, was 24%. So making sure that we had that supply chain tightly integrated and understood where they were going was definitely a challenge for us. And at the same time, as Dave pointed out, also keeping in mind the growth that we were seeing in other regions of the world as we all kind of faced this meltdown and where Brazil was going. And Brazil was somewhat sheltered from this global meltdown. And then one of the things that helped us with our drivers was the NTSA really pushing and continuing to push something that we've been leading and encouraging for 5 years now, is really going to side impact pull test. And what we couldn't be more happy about is the roof crush standard changing as well. So not only did we have to keep up with this innovation at a very, very difficult time in our industry, and then again the environmental regulations not changing, which helps us and helps our customers as well. So the challenges, as I pointed out, really this unpredictable demand schedules. We weren't alone. All the other suppliers were on those same conference calls on a Friday morning when we found out that GM didn't want us to ship to most of their assembly plants, but they wanted to make sure that those assembly plants that were running at full capacity didn't skip a beat. So the dynamic of making sure we shut down production completely at a specific assembly plant and then kept other models going obviously was a challenge to be hit that quickly. And that's part of this unpredictability that we've obviously never seen in this industry. And then again, this unstable supply base, as we talked about, not only what would be considered our normal suppliers of steel, but all the chemical suppliers that we use have gone through their own consolidation, and we've really tried to keep an eye on these big chemical companies and where they were going and where we need to get our product from in these small regions in the world. And again, tighter control on spend, as we all know, driving down manufacturing costs, inventory, all of the things that Dave mentioned, trying to balance that, all the different factors to keep this going. And then again, not only our customer stability and looking at our customers' receivables and pushing back to General Motors to make sure they weren't behind on payments obviously was very difficult, and to make sure that we were clear every single week where we were with them as they went in and out of their tough year. And then again, as I mentioned before, the challenges are how do we continue our nimble designs, how do we continue our research and development, our designs for these things that we were excited about and waiting for and anticipating around these safety standards and roof crush. So again, what helped us and was just great timing for us so that we weathered this storm. Couldn't have been better timing. We ended up implementing our Oracle solution on the e-business suite, Release 12, in October of 2008. And if you remember back, that was right at the time that our world collapsed and began to collapse going into the end of that year. a very difficult fourth quarter that the impact to not only our employees to go through a business transformation and also watching our employees leave that have been family with us for our 51 years. Again, without this fully integrated transformational ERP, we could not have pulled all of the pieces together as quickly as we did. And we were fortunate to have a partner in Fujitsu working with us along this very difficult lean timeline where we drove this implementation within 10 months from our initial landing people on the ground to finally turning live in the day I'll never forget, October 13th, which happened to be 2 days before my first year anniversary of the company. So it was a challenging year, and it really leveraged us to drive out what we needed to accomplish in obviously a very difficult year. So our main challenges with this solution that we went through this without having this tightly integrated supply chain, that was number one. Not only us reaching back to our suppliers, but really getting those releases through into our schedules every single day. So I can't share, I guess when we talk about supply base, I can't tell you how tightly integrated that supply chain was during those times of not only understanding, as I mentioned, where GM was going, but Ford is a very large customer of ours, and Ford was, thank goodness, full steam ahead. So we couldn't, slow down on any of the supply for Ford while we balanced what we did with GM and Chrysler. So very, very dynamic. Again, something we hadn't seen in the industry. So again, we were focused on in our supply chain what we call our 14 key suppliers that needed to help do our final assembly and then bring us products so that we could final assembly and then meet the needs of obviously our customers. Customer fulfillment was very important for us, obviously, but that goes to Dave's point about that supply chain, those scenarios, those forecasts of how do we figure out where we need to be in China, what does Brazil look like while we're balancing all the other cards that we had. Again, active supplier management, making sure, are they keeping up with us? Are they healthy? If they missed a shipment to us, was it because they missed the truck or they didn't have money in the bank? So again, it was a lot of very tight, close discussions about where we're all going to make sure we all got there together. When we talk about operational excellence, if we had not had a system in place for us to find out daily where we were when we talk about operational excellence, about where we are in our warehouse, what inventory do we have on the floor. We also took the time during this very, very difficult period to really lean out our warehouses. It wasn't something we did because of the meltdown. It was something we had planned to do anyway, which again would have been disruptive to the way we used to have product on the shelf in the past, and we got very lean, drove down those warehouse costs, which was important for us. And then, as I mentioned before, how do we consider to keep our product development going, where we really had a focus on design to cost. The big margins are no longer there. We couldn't walk in and demand what we had in the past, so we really had to get very clear on design to cost and then really taking our concept to obsolescence. And it was the first time we did it with a PLM system where we had to make sure that everyone was going through life cycle phases and doing the discipline that we hadn't had in the past. So again, we looked at Oracle and this business process that we put together with Fujitsu as really the way for us to drive out those efficiencies, not just on our shop floor, but also through our engineering departments. And then again, we also, part of our solution was, of course, our financials, so that we could run out our period end close. What was important for us wasn't the fact that we could close the month in a day and a half as we are. now with the new system, but it was more important for us to have that visibility, what I'll call that daily business close. So it was so important for us to know where we were in the warehouse and where we were in our AR, and of course how we're taking care of our suppliers as we were going through this process. Again, we did 26 modules of these key business process. So again, it was a very enterprise-wide transformation, and a pretty dynamic transformation in these 10 months. So some of the benefits that we realized, again, I don't want to harp on the supply chain, but it was very important for us to get our demand schedules near real time. And when I say near real time, we now go from getting a release, an electronic release from our customers, and get product on a truck, and we've done it in less than 3 hours when we've had same-day plant losses. So these are our products, as you can tell, go into the vehicles when they're being assembled. So they can't pull them off the line, they can't put them on later, they can't retrofit, they will shut down a line. So when they have a plant loss and they're our customer, we're going to react. And we couldn't have done it without this solution. Inventory reductions, of course, we brought that down. Couldn't be happier about that. We took millions of dollars out of our inventory, millions of dollars to help us take that cash and expand where we needed to. In Brazil, we opened up our office in Brazil during this meltdown. We've expanded in Asia, and we're continuing to push that cash into those regions where we need to grow. Part of our product is actually has a shelf life because it's a chemical that goes into the vehicle. They expand, they seal, they get stronger when the car goes into final bake from the paint shop. So it's very important for us when a plant goes down and they shut down where we're checking out our shelf life, and we can guarantee that when the order comes in and then they decide to wait on the order for, in some cases, 11 weeks, that we didn't give them bad product when those lines came back on. So we had fewer shelf life issues because, again, we were managing and monitoring that inventory tighter than we ever had in the past. And again, our shipping accuracy, fewer expedited shipments, even though it was a time of chaos, is in the past we would have eaten those expedites because we wouldn't have known if it was really our fault, their fault, who maybe missed the handoff, the handshake. And now with an automated, what I'll call an institutionalized process around our supply chain, we know exactly who owns that expedite. So that's a key metric for us as well. And then again, as I mentioned, roof crush, we had our designs ready to go. We were the first to jump on those roof crush designs. The crash tests just came out. They were just announced a few weeks ago. And when you see those vehicles that are scoring those 5-star crash ratings, the good news is there's been a shift in those customers of ours that felt that the safety was important. There's been a big shift with the latest results of the roof crush and side pole impact. And we're just delighted that those companies that got the recognition for having the bold moves to go out after that ahead of time, ahead of the standard, are the ones that Consumer Report is now saying has the best safety records. And then again, our real-time transparency of our Oracle process. We know when we have either the wrong information in our that we received, or what happened on our shop floor as it's happening, instead of waiting for production to be posted at the end of the day or the next day. And then again, as I mentioned before, our financial close is a non-event, which is very important for us to just continue that on. So our vision for the future is really to expand our global product development capabilities and be closer to our customers, extend our manufacturing footprint. As I've mentioned, we're aggressively going after that. continue to drive out costs everywhere in the operation, again, as we talk about design to cost. Standardize on what we call our broader chemical formulations to get down to those chemicals that work even stronger and better at less cost, not only to us, but then we pass on those costs to our customers, and again, that's our competitive advantage. And then again, we still want to make sure we're that market leader in innovation.
Craig, thank you for sharing your experiences, lessons learned, and vision. You know, it's interesting how Dave earlier described price pressure, uncertain quantities, and cost pressure driving the need for greater productivity and tighter supply chain control, and how important that will be to the future. And if we look at what you've achieved, Craig, it's exactly that. You took command of your costs, your supply chain and productivity, and you're driving lean operational efficiencies. And at the same time, you're able to better react to your customers with meeting their demand and fulfillment through the stronger forecasting that you've established within your organization and the tighter links that you've put in place to your end customers. You know, and I'm sure all of that is what's contributing to help you drive your company to greater profit and stability during these tough times. So thank you again, Craig, for sharing that with us. That was an excellent insight. The other thing that is also interesting that we're seeing in the marketplace as Fujitsu is that the ability to make decisions and apply them into the business dynamically is becoming more and more important in the economy, particularly for competitive edge. If we look at what Craig talked about, he referred to the visibility he has into the business and the daily business close that he does, and how that allows him to consistently fine-tune the business and the organization to stay ahead of the curve, and in particular, keep control of that supply chain. You know, in the earlier implementations of ERP, the focus was heavily on the process design, but today, with the richness and the best practice already built into solutions like Oracle, we as an implementer spend a lot less time looking at process and more time with our clients looking at outcomes and decision-making that they need to make in order to underpin their business. Once we've decided that, it's a lot easier then to adopt the best practices and processes that are already built into solutions like Oracle in order to allow those business decisions and those outcomes to be achieved. You know, this is very different from the traditional approach of process-centric design around ERP and the huge blueprint exercises that people would have to go through. In fact, as a proponent of lean solutions, Fujitsu is now taking this a step further. And as well as focusing on the outcomes that drive out waste, we're also taking lessons learned from implementing solutions like Craig's that you saw today, and we're taking the learning from that and creating repeatable templatized solutions around Oracle that underpin those desired outcomes and the decision-making that's specific to that industry. This repeatability results in three key things for our clients. First, it allows us to provide coaching on what decisions are important to the industry and how to design your solutions around outcomes. Second, the time to implement these type of solutions used in a templatized approach is greatly reduced, and it's allowing us to implement full ERP systems in less than 6 months, which is a significant step forward from where the industry was a year ago. And finally, this rapid implementation approach, which also results in limited customization because we use as much of the best practice out of the software as we can, it allows us to, make solutions like Oracle very affordable for the mid-market. I think, I come across a number of suppliers who say, hey, or clients who say, hey, I recognize that Oracle is the rich solution in the marketplace, but I'm not sure I can afford it, and I'm making compromise decisions about taking lesser solutions off other vendors. And as we show our clients, particularly in the mid-market, this templatized approach around rapid implementation, we can help them drive the implementation cost down dramatically on solutions like Oracle and make them very, very price competitive to other lesser solutions in the marketplace. So that's a very exciting thing that we've been involved in recently. Sasha, does it make sense now to go to Q&A?
Sure. I have not received any text questions, so I don't know if there were any other questions that have come in.
At this point, we don't have any live questions, but ladies and gentlemen, you can see on the screen right now that you're certainly welcome to continue to type in text questions. And if you want to come to the phone and ask a live question, just press *8 on your telephone keypad. And we'll wait just a moment. Sasha, are there any general questions that usually come up with this kind of presentation?
There are. There's a couple, and the first of those are directed to you, Dave, one of which is be interesting to hear your thoughts on the cost reductions and reduced break-even cost structures relative to industry volume returns. So do you think those are going to stay in place as the industry volumes start to spike, or do you think they're going to continue to remain?
Yeah, well, it certainly will be natural for those costs to escalate and come back into the system, but I think that there's two things that will hold them down this time, and that is, one is if you look at the forecast that I showed you, we're not looking for the next peak to be higher than the previous peak in this cycle.
Right.
So that's, at one point, I think will keep the capacity and the other fixed costs from creeping back in too quickly here. The other is the ownership issues here, that you have more private equity and other financial-oriented owners here who are really looking at return on invested capital.
Absolutely.
And so that will keep a strong discipline in the system. I think one of the things I would worry about, and it gets back into one of the points that Craig brought up about taking out the millions of dollars in the working capital and the inventories through the system. I think that's, if you don't have that kind of daily visibility into your system, that's the one where it's natural to start putting in buffer stocks and other safety stocks in. And that is one cost that certainly could creep in here pretty quick.
Interesting. I also, you were talking earlier before we started today's conference about the issue of capacity. And as we've seen all these plant closures, and Craig, you also talked earlier about the impact on the supply base as the OEM plant closures started to increase. What is your sense in terms of a scaling back permanently of capacity? Do you see that as a long-term inevitability, or do you see that there is going to be a reopening, if you will?
Sure. I think in the developed markets, it is going to be scaled back and stair-stepped up in a more disciplined process. And that's through the whole supply chain. Even if you look at the steel mills and the steel producers, how slow they are in terms of coming back online with their capacity here. I guess, but I would get back to the global capacity.
Yeah.
And if you look at the BRIC countries that Craig referred back to, that's where the expansion is going on, and I think that's where there still is risk to overbuild and then you want to naturally fill that capacity because it's a capital-intensive industry, and then that's where the downward pressure on prices go. The other thing, though, that I'll come back to, where it's a real fluid and dynamic target number here, is that one example of that one member company who said, I'm getting more capacity out of 2 plants than I was out of 4 now. So actually his capacity is actually up, even though he has less floor space.
Right, but his productivity has increased.
His productivity is up, and that's what will keep again the downward pressure on prices.
That's a very profound insight, and I think similar to that, or extending that, is in your equation that you had presented on regarding the only way to increase margin is through productivity increases. You stated there's a downward pressure on prices. Is it a given that prices have to be beaten down, or aren't suppliers pursuing strategies to move prices and margins back upward?
Well, I think that the leverage change is a dynamic one that is going on. So you have certainly the customers are smaller, if you will, but still keep in mind, General Motors is still going to have 18-19% of the North American market here going forward. So in the pyramid of the auto industry, the vehicle manufacturers will still be on a scale, 5 to 10 times than even the largest of the suppliers are in that first tier of suppliers. So that scale will remain there. I think certainly the suppliers are pursuing strategies of increasing their value add in terms of producing modules or higher value added components, but that's providing more for less, because the overall price of the vehicle still has to be targeted in an affordable package.
Right.
And then the other thing, as you take a look at diversification into other industries, we're breaking in. The auto suppliers are breaking into the medical systems, or they're breaking into all these other industries, so they have to be very, very price competitive to be able to offset an existing supplier in those other industries.
Right.
So.
Right. Great insight again. This next question I have is actually directed toward Craig, and I think it dovetails with some of the comments that Paul had made earlier about this sort of return on IT investment. And you talk a lot about that, Craig, how this implementation really helped with your restructuring efforts, specifically in terms of cost and savings and productivity increases. So I think there is somewhat, however, a perception that Oracle solutions might be too rich in functionality for a mid-sized supplier and too costly. And I'm just wondering if you could provide the audience with some insight into your experience with the Oracle product.
Sure. I think the approach we took, which was what I'll call a lean approach to implementing Oracle, but we still did it with 26 modules, so it was, again, very, very feature rich. I think as we go through, I think you can't separate the business process. The business process needs to be the full process. There's no way to do procure to pay without it being the full process. I think, though, especially when we get into emerging markets, I think it's clear that you can give them kind of the light version so you don't overwhelm them with all of the features and functions in every single process within that flow. So and that's kind of how we separate it. So it still makes sense to have the full solution, and then again, just not go as heavy on giving maybe another area, full scenario forecasting if they don't need it.
Okay, excellent. Okay. We do have a question that was submitted, and this will be directed to Craig, asking about how Oracle, or if Oracle, has helped you guys load the business right through improving sales and commercial practices during the request for quote phase, long-range forecasting, like month 4 through year 5, for example.
Let me see if I understand. So we did use, we're using Oracle and CSM's data. We're using CSM's data along with our sales team to run through our planning scenarios. So when we talk about Oracle demand planning, advanced supply chain planning, we're taking that data in and obviously tying it to our sales team that knows exactly what's going on, not only specifically that OEM, but what's going on in that assembly plant, and if they're really seeing the volumes that we're expecting. And again, with the volatility that we've seen in the last year, nobody had the right prediction, so we were always managing. Not only is CSM right now maybe optimistic, pessimistic in what we're seeing, especially when we're looking at the different OEMs on a very specific car line by car line. So we did use the Oracle technology to actually go through those simulations.
Excellent. Any other questions, Diane?
I don't have any live questions at this time.
Okay, well, with that, I would certainly like to thank both Dave and Craig for taking the time to be with us here today to discuss the transformation of the automotive industry and how Automotive ERP has helped them transform their organizations. And thank you so much to you, our listeners. I'm Sasha Banks.
And I'm Paul Bresnahan, and thank you again for joining us. To learn more about the Fujitsu Lean Accelerated Methodology to the ERP implementations and to Oracle's Transformation Automotive ERP Solutions, please visit the website displayed on your screen today. When you go into the links on the Fujitsu site, you'll be able to replay this webinar if you want to share it with other people within your organization. And in addition, on both links, they'll be made available to you a brochure on this transformational Oracle ERP for automotive industry, and also some case studies on white papers of how we're applying this lean implementation into helping accelerate business for our clients. So thank you again for joining.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude today's webinar. We appreciate your time and participation, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.